just waiting to buy tobacco and rye from now till I die.
In 1968, Hollywood stormed into the wild, untouched forests of northeastern Oregon, determined to film a massive musical western like nothing anyone had ever seen. But instead of a masterpiece, they ended up with a full-blown disaster. The production was swallowed by chaos, endless rewrites, brutal weather, and messy personal scandals that nearly tore the entire thing apart. At the heart of it all were two giants, Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood, living through a real-life drama that made the movie's script look tame. The film came and went, but the chaos stuck with Marvin for decades. And near the end of his life, he finally broke his silence, revealing what really went down in those mountains. And what he exposed about Clint Eastwood shocked everyone. This was the story of how total mayhem helped shape a Hollywood legend. But to understand Marvin, we have to rewind to New York City. That's where it all started, where Lee Marvin was born into comfort and class on February 19th, 1924. His father was a successful advertising exec, and his mother thrived in the fast-moving world of fashion writing. Even his name carried power. His parents were so proud of their family's distant link to Confederate General Robert E. Lee that they named one son Robert and the other Lee. That choice stuck with him for life. On paper, his childhood looked polished and perfect, but once he hit school, that illusion shattered fast. Lee wasn't some star student, far from it. He skipped class, got into fights, and constantly tested every boundary he could find. Even back then, he had that restless spark that would later turn him into one of Hollywood's most unpredictable legends. Those wild habits became his trademarks long before Hollywood ever came knocking. Eventually, doctors finally gave names to the struggles that had haunted him for years, dyslexia and ADHD. Learning felt like a daily war, and most days Marvin walked away bruised but unbroken. Yet somehow creativity still slipped through the cracks. He picked up the violin. Yeah, a violin. A delicate, unexpected outlet for a kid who usually lived rough and restless. But Lee Marvin wasn't the type to stick to just one rhythm. Alongside those soft strings came a second obsession, hunting. One day, he was lost in music. The next, he was deep in the woods, tracking game with pure focus and adrenaline pumping through his veins. It was like two completely different versions of Lee Marvin were fighting for space inside the same body. School never stood a chance against that kind of energy. After some time at a socialist boarding school in upstate New York, and a string of expulsions from fancy college prep programs, Marvin made his own decision. He was done with classrooms, rules, and lectures. The academic world wasn't built for him. But while he was walking away from education, the outside world was preparing to drag him into something far bigger. It was 1942, and the world was at war. Everything was changing fast, and Marvin made a bold move that would define his life long before any camera ever pointed his way. He enlisted in the United States Marines. His service wasn't just courageous, it was brutal, raw, and unforgettable. On the island of Saipan, he was thrown straight into the chaos of battle, face to face with the kind of danger that reshaped him forever. Machine gun fire ripped through his unit like a storm of steel, leaving wreckage and silence in its wake. Lee Marvin survived, but just barely. A burst of bullets tore into his lower back and hips, injuries so bad they almost claimed his life. Yet even in the face of that pain, his grit never cracked. For his courage and sacrifice, he was awarded the Purple Heart, along with a set of military honors that told the story of what he endured and what he gave in 1945. When his body finally healed enough to move again, Marvin was sent home, honorably discharged and branded a hero. But back in America, that hero label didn't exactly open doors. The fame of war didn't pay the bills. His first job? Working as a plumber's assistant. Dirty, back-breaking labor that left him exhausted and stained with grease every night. It was a long fall from the battlefield to the basement. For a while, it looked like that might be it. Lee Marvin, the quiet veteran with a wrench in one hand and war memories no one really understood. But fate had other plans, and they showed up in the most unexpected place. A small community theater. One night, right in the middle of a production, an actor suddenly fell ill. Panic hit the crew, and they needed a stand-in fast. Without hesitation, Marvin stepped forward, not with training, but with pure nerve. He walked onto that stage, faced the lights, and gave a performance that stunned everyone. In that moment, something clicked deep inside him. He realized he'd found what school couldn't teach and what war couldn't silence, a new purpose. Acting hit him hard, like a rush he couldn't walk away from. From then on, he hustled his way through off-Broadway plays across New York, taking every gig he could find, learning fast, and proving he belonged. That raw determination eventually carried him straight to Broadway, where he landed his first major role in Billy. It was a small role, sure, but it meant everything. That first taste of Broadway success signaled one thing loud and clear. Lee Marvin was moving up fast, and soon the next step became impossible to ignore. Hollywood. California was calling, a whole new battlefield filled with flashing lights, big egos, and cutthroat competition. In 1950, Marvin packed up and headed west, ready to fight a brand new kind of war, this time against casting lists and endless rejections. But Marvin had an edge no acting coach could ever teach. He'd lived through real combat. He didn't just act tough, he was tough. Directors respected him instantly. Actors watched him closely. Productions leaned on him for that raw, authentic grit. If a scene needed to feel real, or if a gun needed to be held just right, Lee Marvin was the man everyone called. His film debut came in 1951 with You're in the Navy Now, the same movie that also introduced a rising star named Charles Bronson. Most of it was filmed in Virginia, but when the shoot later moved to Hollywood, Marvin didn't bother going back east. He stayed put. That single decision locked him into the industry for good, planting him right in the heart of the dream he was chasing. Next up came a blink-and-you'll-miss-it part in Teresa. So tiny he didn't even get credited, but that didn't faze him one bit. What he brought to every set was priceless. Real soldier's knowledge, the kind of small details no one else could fake. Word spread quietly at first, then like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone wanted that Lee Marvin edge. By 1952, his momentum was unstoppable. That year didn't just push his career forward, it launched it. He appeared in 5 films, squeezed in some television gigs, and still found time to stir up drama behind the scenes. He wasn't a headline name yet. Most of his roles were buried deep in the credits, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Even in the background, Lee Marvin burned bright like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode into stardom. But while his career was slowly heating up, his personal life was already running at full speed. Somewhere between movie sets and endless auditions, Lee Marvin made a surprise detour to Las Vegas, where he tied the knot with Betty Ebling, who, fun fact, had once worked as Joan Crawford's nanny. It was quick, bold, and pure Marvin style. Before long, the two were raising 4 kids, a son and 3 daughters, turning his life upside down almost overnight. Now, Marvin wasn't just an actor chasing a dream. He was a husband, a father, and a man with a family depending on him. Acting stopped being about fame or ambition. It became about survival. Every paycheck mattered, and he worked like a man who had no choice but to make it happen. The very next year, Marvin kicked things into overdrive, appearing in 7 films, and one of them made serious noise. It was a 3D Western, still a rare gimmick back then, and audiences lost it when Lee Marvin came lunging right out of the screen, rifle raised, staring straight down the barrel at them. If moviegoers didn't know his name before that, they sure remembered it after that shocking moment. Still, Hollywood hadn't quite figured him out yet. He wasn't leading man handsome, and he didn't fit neatly into any box. But those rough-edged, tough guy roles, they were calling to him, loud and clear. He just needed a shot to prove he could own that image. And that chance came when he landed a part in The Wild One. There was one hitch, though. Marvin couldn't ride a motorcycle. Meanwhile, Marlon Brando made it look effortless, which only turned up the heat, but instead of backing off, Marvin went all in. He trained hard, learned to ride like a pro, and before long, he was tearing up tracks in real life. That movie didn't just hand him a job, it handed him an identity. From that point on, Lee Marvin wasn't pretending to be a tough guy. He was the tough guy, the real deal, both on screen and off. He didn't just play the tough guys, he became them. And Hollywood couldn't look away. Later that same year, Lee Marvin took a chilling turn in Fritz Lang's The Big Heat, stepping into one of the most disturbing villain roles of the entire decade. When his character hurled scalding coffee into Gloria Graham's face, audiences gasped in horror. The scene was shocking, brutal, raw, and way too convincing. People left theaters whispering, wondering if Lee Marvin might be just as dangerous when the cameras stopped rolling. And truth be told, off-screen, he had an edge that kept people guessing. By 1954, Marvin found himself starring in Gorilla at Large, a campy 3D thriller, and that's where he met the magnetic Anne Bancroft. Away from the spotlight and away from his wife and kids, Marvin started a secret affair with her. They kept things hidden, even when fate brought them back together later on the set of A Life in the Balance. But as that passion burned in the shadows, his home life started to crumble. Professionally, things weren't much smoother either. He was working, sure, but still not breaking through to that next level. Then, out of nowhere, television threw him a lifeline. In 1957, Marvin landed a role that finally flipped the script. He became the hero. As Chicago Detective Lieutenant Frank Ballinger in M Squad, Marvin took center stage for the first time, leading the show through an incredible 117 episodes. Viewers loved him, and he finally got that taste of the spotlight he'd been chasing for years. But when M Squad ended, the applause faded fast. Hollywood went quiet, and suddenly Marvin found himself adrift. A full year passed without a single gig. Depression hit hard, and his life started sliding toward dangerous territory again. Yet, just when it seemed like the curtain might fall, fate threw him one more twist. John Wayne himself stepped in. The Duke saw something raw and real in Marvin's work and invited him to join the Comancheros in 1961. That role didn't just revive Marvin's career, it kicked open the door to their next legendary collaboration. This time, Lee Marvin wasn't just a supporting face. He was part of a cinematic legend. In The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, he brought the cold-blooded outlaw of the title to life with chilling precision. Sharing the screen with icons like John Wayne and James Stewart, Marvin stood shoulder to shoulder with two of Hollywood's biggest names, and for the first time, he wasn't the smallest star in the frame. He held his own with raw power and menace that audiences couldn't forget. Then came 1964, and The Killers. For the first time ever, Lee Marvin's name stood alone at the top of the credits. After years of playing faceless heavies, silent thugs, and nameless shadows lurking in the background, he finally claimed his spotlight with a leading role that hit like an explosion. This wasn't a slow rise anymore. It was a full-blown launch into stardom. From that moment on, his career didn't just climb, it soared. By 1965, Marvin found himself on the lavish set of Ship of Fools, a drama that took place aboard what looked like a floating palace. But by then, Lee had also earned a reputation off-screen as a man who could drink just about anyone under the table. And fate, with its dark sense of humor, paired him with someone who could keep up, Vivien Leigh. Yes, that Vivien Leigh, the once glorious star who had stolen hearts around the world and Gone with the Wind. But this was a later chapter for her, one marked by deep sadness, personal battles, and a growing reliance on alcohol. In a strange twist of fate, the two were cut from the same rugged cloth, which made what happened next even more ironic. During filming, Vivien actually complained that Marvin had drinker's breath during their scenes together. The tension between them was thick from the very start, awkward, sharp, and impossible to ignore. But while that connection fell flat fast, someone else on set took to Marvin in a much warmer, far more complicated way. Michelle Triola, a sultry club dancer and singer with a small role in the film, caught Lee Marvin's attention almost instantly. The spark between them didn't build slowly, it caught fire fast. Within weeks, Marvin packed up his life and moved in with her. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Michelle later said meeting him changed everything, and she wasn't exaggerating, because what followed was a wild mix of passion, chaos, and heartbreak all rolled into one. But before that heartbreak hit, something unexpected happened. Marvin and Michelle actually grew close to Vivien Leigh, the same legendary actress who had clashed with Marvin on set. They became friendly enough that she invited both of them to stay at her home in England. It sounded glamorous, but Marvin wasn't exactly built for polite British hospitality. One night, during what was supposed to be a harmless card game, things got heated. Marvin, fueled by intensity and maybe a little too much to drink, lost his temper and ripped the deck of cards clean in half. And these weren't just any cards, they were antiques. Michelle froze, waiting for Vivian to explode, but instead, Vivian laughed. She was oddly charmed by Marvin's rough edges, finding that wild energy part of his strange, rugged appeal. That untamed personality worked wonders in social circles, but not always on set. Earlier that same year, Marvin took on a new challenge, the comedy Western Cat Ballou. It was the perfect playground for his wild spirit, full of big energy and rowdy humor. Most of the cast thought his drinking actually added to his performance, loosening him up and feeding that unpredictable spark that made him magnetic on screen. But not everyone was laughing. Jane Fonda, the film's star, wasn't impressed. She kept her distance, her patience thinning day by day as Marvin's off-screen antics wore her down. The tension on set built quietly until everything snapped when her fiancé, Roger Vadim, showed up for a visit, turning that chilly air between them into something explosive. When Jane Fonda's fiancé, Roger Vadim, showed up on set, things went downhill fast. Lee Marvin had clearly been drinking, and instead of keeping things polite, he went full throttle. The moment he met Vadim, Marvin blurted out that he hated the French. Then, without skipping a beat, he added that he only liked Vadim because he was half Russian, only to immediately follow it up by saying he hated Russians too. The whole encounter was pure chaos, loud, reckless, and dripping with that signature Marvin bravado. For Jane Fonda, filming Cat Ballou turned into a nightmare. She was frustrated, uncomfortable, and blamed most of the tension squarely on Marvin. Yet in a twist no one saw coming, not even her, fate had something wild in store. In the movie, Marvin played not one but two completely different characters, pushing himself harder than he ever had as an actor. And that risk paid off in ways no one expected. When awards season hit, Hollywood couldn't ignore him anymore. Lee Marvin didn't just get nominated, he won the Oscar for Best Actor. He beat out legends like Laurence Olivier, Rod Steiger, and Richard Burton, names everyone assumed would crush the competition. But on that night, they all stepped aside, and Lee Marvin stood victorious, holding the golden statue that changed everything. That Oscar wasn't just a prize, it was jet fuel. Marvin's career blasted into overdrive, his paycheck skyrocketed, his fame exploded, and suddenly he was one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But fame didn't change his attitude one bit. If anything, his stubborn streak burned even brighter. During the filming of The Professionals, Marvin butted heads hard with his co-star Burt Lancaster. The tension between them got so heated that the director actually feared Lancaster might throw Marvin off a mountain. The root of it all? The same old demons, too much drinking, too little control. And when Point Blank rolled around, things didn't cool down at all. Marvin complained that his co-star John Vernon didn't look tough enough to go toe-to-toe with him on screen. And that ego-fueled storm was only just beginning to spin out of control. So Marvin decided to test John Vernon the only way he knew how, by throwing a real punch. Without warning, he slammed his fist hard into Vernon's stomach. Vernon was furious, and honestly, who wouldn't be? But the wild thing was, Marvin got the reaction he wanted. That burst of anger and intensity fired up Vernon's next scene with raw power. And that's exactly what Marvin was after. At that stage in his life, Lee Marvin wasn't just throwing his weight around, he was swinging it. Physically, professionally, and financially, he was a force of nature, and everyone in Hollywood was watching to see just how far that fire would take him. Fame came with a heavy price, though. Cat Ballou might have earned him his Oscar, but it wasn't the movie that defined his career. That honor belonged to The Dirty Dozen in 1967, a blockbuster that became his crowning achievement. The film wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. Marvin commanded the screen as the hard-as-nails leader of a ragtag team of soldiers, holding his own alongside powerhouses like Charles Bronson, John Cassavetes, and Donald Sutherland. The Dirty Dozen shot him straight to the top. It was the peak of his career, the role everyone remembered. But once you hit the top, There's nowhere to go but down, and that's exactly what started to happen. Some of his next roles were strong, but others slipped away, missed chances that would later haunt his legacy. One of the biggest missed opportunities came just 2 years later in 1969. Director Sam Peckinpah was putting together a gritty, violent Western that would rewrite movie history, The Wild Bunch. With The Dirty Dozen still roaring in theaters, Peckinpah had one name circled in bold at the top of his list: Lee Marvin. Critics were buzzing, studios were watching, and everyone assumed Marvin was about to lock down another legendary performance. But then came the catch: money. Marvin liked the script, but the paycheck didn't fit the image of a newly minted Hollywood heavyweight. And just as he was about to make a decision, another offer landed on his desk, another Western, but this one came with a wild twist. It was a musical, a strange pairing for a gravel-voiced war hero like Marvin, but fate clearly had something unpredictable and chaotic waiting just around the corner. This time, the offer on the table came with a paycheck too big to turn down. Lee Marvin made the call. He polished his voice just enough to fake his way through a few songs and walked away from the Wild Bunch to take on something completely different, a musical called Paint Your Wagon. It seemed like a smart financial move at the time, but history would prove otherwise. The Wild Bunch went on to become an all-time classic, hailed as a brutal masterpiece, preserved in the National Film Registry, and ranked among the American Film Institute's greatest films and thrillers. Meanwhile, Paint Your Wagon stumbled hard. The movie barely made a dent at the box office and now mostly lives on as a running joke. Yes, even The Simpsons took a jab at it. Still, the production wasn't a total loss for Marvin personally. Sure, he was drinking more than ever. Some said every day started and ended with a bottle. But oddly enough, it worked for the role. He wasn't a trained singer by any stretch, yet that gravelly, wandering voice of his somehow fit. When he performed Wandering Star, it struck a chord with audiences and went on to earn him a gold record. Imagine that. Hollywood's roughest tough guy accidentally becoming a hit singer. But good luck never lasted long where Marvin's drinking was involved. By 1970, during the filming of Monty Walsh, his habit had gotten so bad that director William A. Fraker had to step in and ban him from drinking on set altogether. It wasn't a fix, it was just damage control. Ironically, one of Marvin's castmates, Mitchell Ryan, was also fighting his own demons at the time. When Fraker decided to fire Ryan, Marvin stepped in and used his reputation and star power to save the man's job. Even when everything around him was falling apart, that fierce loyalty of his could still shine through. The work kept coming, but the magic was slipping away. The roles weren't hitting like they used to, and the sparkle of fame was starting to fade. Then, in 1972, fate dangled yet another massive opportunity in front of him. Director John Boorman had a vision: Lee Marvin and Marlon Brando leading a tense, gritty backwoods thriller called Deliverance. It could have been the film to put Marvin right back on top, but destiny had other plans. Deliverance could have been another career-defining hit for Lee Marvin, but he turned it down. He told director John Boorman that he and Marlon Brando were too old for the roles. Boorman agreed, recast the film with younger stars, and the rest was history. The movie became a massive success, launching John Voight and Burt Reynolds into superstardom. Once again, Marvin had walked away from a classic before it ever had the chance to reach him, and that decision would haunt him for years. But while his career choices stumbled, his personal life got even more tangled. Marvin had been living with singer Michelle Triola, known to him as Ola, for years, though they were never officially married. Ola had talent of her own and even recorded an album, but she put her ambitions on hold to follow Marvin's chaotic life around the world. She kept their home, stood by him through his highs and lows, and waited for him to finally make their partnership official. But he never did. She gave up her dreams for him, and it cost her dearly. To really understand Marvin's emotional distance, you have to rewind to 1945. He was just 21 then, involved with Pamela Feely, a teenage girl of 17 who became pregnant. In desperation, Marvin arranged for a secret and illegal abortion. The procedure went horribly wrong. Pamela nearly died, and afterward Marvin vanished. He left her with a simple promise that he was going away just for the summer. But he never came back. That moment stayed buried for decades, yet it never truly left his mind. Then, 25 years later, while still living with Ola, Marvin suddenly returned to his hometown. He showed up unannounced at Pamela Feely's house, walked straight into her kitchen, and told her something she never expected to hear, that he had come back for her. Shocked and overwhelmed, Pamela welcomed him with open arms, unaware of the emotional storm she was stepping into. But there was one enormous complication. Ola was still waiting for him back in California, expecting marriage, commitment, something. What followed would pull all three lives into a storm of heartbreak, betrayal, and scandal that Hollywood itself couldn't have written better. Michelle Ola Triola had been by Lee Marvin's side since 1965, and she was all in. She even legally changed her last name to Marvin, believing she was in every real way his wife. But when Marvin shocked her by announcing his plans to marry Pamela Feely instead, Ola didn't crumble. She came out swinging. She hired lawyers and prepared for battle, setting the stage for one of Hollywood's most explosive courtroom showdowns, Marvin versus Marvin. Ola's case was bold and deeply personal. She argued that she had lived as Marvin's wife for years and therefore deserved financial compensation as one. In court, she opened up about the painful sacrifices she'd made during their relationship. She revealed that she'd become pregnant 3 times, one pregnancy ending in miscarriage, and the other 2 terminated, both procedures paid for by Marvin himself. Those experiences left her unable to have children, a heartbreak that added another layer to her case. Ola also claimed she gave up her entire singing career to support Marvin's life and success, following him from set to set, home to home, always putting needs ahead of her own dreams. And then came the most powerful piece of evidence, Marvin's own words. Early in their relationship, he had told her, "What I have is yours, and what you have is mine." It was emotional, intimate, and vague enough to leave the court with a difficult question. Did that promise actually mean something legally? When the verdict finally dropped, both sides tried to spin it as a win. Ola was awarded $104,000 tax-free, a hefty sum, but nowhere close to the $3.6 million she had demanded. She framed the outcome as a victory for women everywhere, saying it proved emotional partnerships could still hold value, even without a marriage license. Marvin, on the other hand, strutted out of court claiming total victory, warning single women not to expect massive payouts from relationships without a ring. Time, however, told a different story. The case didn't just define their breakup, it changed California law forever, introducing the concept of palimony. And while Lee Marvin moved on, Ola eventually found peace. She later shared her life with beloved actor Dick Van Dyke, staying by his side for over 30 years. Ironically, just like before, they never married. It was a strange kind of symmetry. 2 long relationships, both deep, both real, yet neither ending with a walk down the aisle. As for Lee Marvin, when the courtroom dust finally settled, he did what few expected. He married Pamela Feely, the same woman he had once abandoned decades earlier. Then, just like always, he drifted right back into the only world that ever truly made sense to him. Movie sets, long nights, and bottles that never seemed to stay closed. By 1980, Marvin was back in uniform, stepping onto the set of The Big Red One, and he made an entrance no one could forget. The cast was buzzing, expecting one of his trademark rough-edged greetings, but instead, silence. He didn't say a single word. No hello, no handshake, nothing. He just stood there, quiet, cold, unreadable, and everyone felt the weight of it. Then came the car ride. Marvin sat with his 3 co-stars, Robert Carradine, Mark Hamill, and Bobby DeCicco, when out of nowhere he finally broke the silence. He looked around the car and asked almost casually, "Which one of you is Carradine?" When Robert Carradine raised his hand, Marvin turned to him and hit him with a single, sharp profanity, just one word. Then, nothing. No explanation, no laugh, no follow-up. Just silence again. The moment was so bizarre it left everyone wondering, was he testing them, messing with them, or just lost inside his own head? But time was catching up to him fast. A few years later, Marvin's body began to pay the brutal price for decades of heavy drinking. In 1983, while filming Michael Apted's Gorky Park, he showed up to set in such rough shape that the production couldn't even begin. They had to send him straight to the hospital. And here's where something remarkable happened, something you don't usually see in Hollywood. Director Michael Apted didn't just wait for his star to recover. He went directly to Marvin's hospital room and started rehearsing the script at his bedside. It was a surreal scene. An ailing Hollywood legend and a determined filmmaker working line by line between IV drips and doctor visits. It was loyalty, professionalism, and desperation all colliding in one unforgettable moment. His next film came with what many called a small miracle. Lee Marvin actually managed to stay sober for the entire shoot. The movie was Dog Day, 1984, and it turned out to be his final leading role. The director later confirmed it himself. Marvin kept clean from start to finish. But as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, the miracle faded. Once filming wrapped, Marvin slipped right back into his old ways, reaching for the bottle like an old friend he could never quite let go of. Then came one of those infamous Marvin moments, drunk, impulsive, and out of control. In a sudden burst of anger, he punched a police officer out of nowhere. The chaos was classic Marvin, explosive and unpredictable. But just as quickly, the guilt set in. The next day, he showed up at the hospital with a bouquet of flowers to apologize to the injured officer. That was Lee Marvin in a nutshell. Rough on the outside, but never completely heartless. By then, the years were finally catching up with him. His body had taken too many hits on the battlefield, on film sets, and in bars, and the wear showed. He was aging fast, faster than he should have, and the industry could see it too. It became painfully clear during the mid-'80s when Marvin signed on for The Dirty Dozen: Next Mission, a sequel to the film that had once defined his career. The story was supposed to pick up just a few months after the original 1967 hit, but in real life, nearly 20 years had passed, and it showed. Audiences couldn't help but notice how much older, heavier, and slower he looked. Some critics even said he looked too old for the first movie, so seeing him reprise the same role 2 decades later only made the contrast sting harder. Then came his final on-screen performance, The Delta Force with Chuck Norris. On paper, it sounded like the perfect return to form, a tough military film with a powerhouse cast. But on screen, it told another story. Marvin looked worn down, exhausted, and far older than his age. For years, people had told him he was getting too old for the roles that made him famous. But now, for the first time, Lee Marvin saw it for himself. And that realization hit harder than any punch he'd ever thrown. That was something different, something final. Behind the curtain of Hollywood fame, Lee Marvin's health was falling apart fast. The stomach pain he'd lived with for years became unbearable, and doctors finally uncovered the truth. His colon was dangerously inflamed. His body, after decades of punishment, was giving out. By December 1986, he was back in the hospital for a major surgery, a colectomy, hoping it might bring some relief, but it didn't. Just weeks later, he suffered a fatal heart attack. At only 63 years old, Lee Marvin was gone. Yet before his death, he revealed something that turned heads across Hollywood. What really went down with Clint Eastwood during one of the wildest productions in film history. Back in 1968, deep in the remote wilderness of northeastern Oregon's Wallowa-Whitman National Forest, Hollywood set out to make something massive, an ambitious, high-budget musical western called Paint Your Wagon. It was supposed to be bold, beautiful, and groundbreaking. Instead, it became one of the most chaotic disasters ever captured on film. A mess of blown budgets, personal breakdowns, and behind-the-scenes turmoil that nearly crushed everyone involved. On screen, the story was set during the California Gold Rush, centered around a no-name town built from nothing in the middle of nowhere. It was a booming, rowdy mining settlement where greed and hope collided in the dust. Lee Marvin took on the role of Ben Rumson, a rough, loud, larger-than-life prospector, famous for his hard drinking and even harder luck. Beside him was Clint Eastwood, playing his partner, a man of few words whose fortune seemed to shift with every shovel of dirt. As the town grew, so did the chaos. Miners poured in, gold flowed like water, and temptation was everywhere. The once small camp exploded into a lawless carnival of money, music, and mayhem. But it couldn't last. The very tunnels dug beneath the town to chase gold eventually caused its downfall. Literally, the ground gave way, swallowing everything, both the town and the dreams that built it. What no one knew at the time, though, was that behind the cameras, the real story of Paint Your Wagon was even more explosive. And Lee Marvin would one day expose the truth about Clint Eastwood that the world had only suspected. It was wild, chaotic, and symbolic of everything that happened behind the scenes. The madness on screen was nothing compared to the real-life storm that surrounded Paint Your Wagon. The chaos didn't start in Oregon, though. Its roots went all the way back to Broadway. The original Paint Your Wagon, a 1951 stage musical by Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loeb, had been a respectable success. These two were musical theater royalty, the same geniuses behind Brigadoon and My Fair Lady. So when Paramount Pictures, under the massive Gulf and Western Empire, decided to bring it to the big screen, they weren't just making a movie. They wanted a blockbuster, something that could rival Mary Poppins and their own golden hit, My Fair Lady. Money poured in from every corner. Lee Marvin was handed a staggering $1 million paycheck plus a share of the profits. Clint Eastwood scored a similar deal. The message was clear. This wasn't just another Western. This was going to be a cinematic event. Alan J. Lerner himself even signed on as a producer, and legendary director Joshua Logan, known for Camelot and South Pacific, took charge behind the camera. Everything looked perfect on paper, but once the production hit the mountains, things took a very different turn. The movie that started filming in the Oregon wilderness barely resembled the Broadway version audiences remembered. Screenwriter Patty Chayefsky tore apart the original script, tossing out major characters and rewriting entire storylines to make the film feel more modern, more in tune with the free-spirited, rebellious vibe of the late 1960s. Suddenly, the story didn't revolve around Marvin or Eastwood at all. It centered on Jean Seberg as Elizabeth, a woman married to both men in a love triangle that some called daringly progressive and others called completely misguided. Even finding the right location turned into a drama of its own. Production designer John Truscott insisted the movie needed a setting so vast and breathtaking that it felt almost unreal. His search led him to the Eagle Creek Valley in northeastern Oregon, a stunning wilderness that looked perfect on film, but came with one big problem. It was almost impossible to reach. The cast and crew faced a brutal 2-hour trek over rough, twisting dirt roads just to get there each day. The solution? Helicopters, expensive, loud, and dangerous. But it was the only way to move people, gear, and supplies up and down those unforgiving mountains, and as the costs and tempers started to climb, Paint Your Wagon was already turning into the epic disaster Hollywood would never forget. With the help of Oregon's governor, Tom McCall, Hollywood went all in. McCall even created a special film office just to support the production, making Oregon look like the next great movie frontier. And what they built out there was nothing short of astonishing. The fictional no-name city wasn't some small backlot set. It was a real town built from the ground up. Full-sized, handcrafted wooden buildings stood tall in the wilderness, each one sitting on massive hydraulic lifts, so the finale could show the entire town collapsing in dramatic fashion. Underneath the dirt streets, they even built tunnels, engineered to cave in on cue. It was movie magic on a jaw-dropping scale, and the price tag showed it. The set alone cost $2.4 million and took 7 months to construct. Governor McCall himself cut the ribbon at the grand opening, treating it like a state event. The nearby town of Baker, Oregon, had never seen anything like it. Hundreds of Hollywood workers flooding in, filling every hotel and diner. Paramount was spending thousands every week just to feed the 400 cast and crew members living on site. Filming officially kicked off on June 24th, 1968, but it didn't take long for the whole thing to start falling apart. Alan J. Lerner, the musical's original writer and now a producer, constantly hovered around the set, second-guessing director Joshua Logan and overruling him whenever he felt like it. Tensions ran high, patience ran thin, and then came the personal drama that nearly tore the production to shreds. Lee Marvin was drinking more than ever, showing up on set unpredictable and aggressive. Clint Eastwood, meanwhile, was quietly lighting a fire of his own, an affair with co-star Gene Seberg that would send shockwaves through the cast and crew. Seberg fell for Eastwood completely, head over heels. She confided in friends that she planned to leave her husband, author Romaine Gary, for Clint. Gary's reaction was straight out of a tragic novel. Furious and heartbroken, he actually challenged Eastwood to a duel. The duel, thankfully, never took place, but the emotional fallout was devastating. Seberg told her publicist she was ready to announce her divorce, fully believing Eastwood would stand by her once she made it official. What she didn't realize was that the man she loved was already starting to pull away, and her heartbreak would become one of the darkest shadows hanging over Paint Your Wagon. What Gene Seberg didn't know was that Clint Eastwood wasn't just caught up in one romance. He was juggling another woman on the very same set. This other woman, an extra whom Eastwood had personally helped get hired, later admitted their affair lasted 2 years and confirmed that Seberg had no idea. So while Gene was dreaming of a future together, Clint was already living a double life behind the scenes. When filming wrapped and everyone returned to Los Angeles, Eastwood simply vanished from Seberg's world. No calls, no closure, nothing. He was gone. For John, it was crushing. She had believed Clint loved her, that he was her escape from an unhappy marriage. But instead of finding love, she found silence, and that heartbreak would follow her for years. Meanwhile, on set, the chaos only deepened. Production had turned into a survival test. Hundreds of local Oregonians were hired as extras, camping near the set for $20 a day, until they realized how brutal the conditions were. Fed up, they threatened to strike unless their pay was bumped to $25. Even an Oregon senator got swept up in the madness, showing up in costume for a cameo on horseback just to be part of the Hollywood circus. Director Joshua Logan, already burned out from constant fights with Alan J. Lerner, was running on fumes. His schedule was brutal. Up before dawn, flown in by helicopter to the mountain set, directing for endless hours, and then flown back out at night just to grab a few hours of sleep before doing it all over again. Later, he admitted that the only thing he could hope for each day was simple, that somehow, someday, it would all end. And just when things couldn't get worse, Mother Nature joined the attack. First came the scorching heat. Temperatures soared past 100 degrees, cooking both the crew and the equipment. Then out of nowhere came something no one saw coming. The first August rain in 35 years. It poured so hard it shut down filming for nearly a month. And if that wasn't enough, October brought snow. Yes, snow. The production was cursed from every direction. Eventually, the crew had no choice but to pack it in, abandoning the mountains of Oregon and heading back to Hollywood to finish the shoot. Cameras finally stopped rolling in early December, but if anyone thought the worst was over, they were wrong. Post-production would prove just as messy, just as chaotic, and just as haunted as the shoot itself. When the chaos finally shifted into post-production, things somehow got even messier. Director Joshua Logan, who had endured months of misery in the Oregon wilderness, was supposed to have the contractual right to assemble his own director's cut. But that right was suddenly ripped away. Alan J. Lerner, the film's powerful producer and co-creator, stepped in and took over the editing room himself. He recut the movie to his liking, slicing and reshaping scenes until Logan barely recognized his own work. The finished version clocked in at a staggering 166 minutes, and when it hit the MPAA, it earned the very first M rating ever issued, a precursor to today's PG rating. But even that version didn't last. Before general release, another 30 minutes were chopped out, trimming the musical down but leaving the story even more uneven. Paint Your Wagon finally premiered in New York on October 15th, 1969, with a glitzy screening later held in Portland, Oregon. Governor Tom McCall himself in attendance, proudly celebrating the film that had brought Hollywood to his state. But the celebration didn't last long. Critics tore the movie to pieces. Columnist Rex Reed called it a monument to unparalleled incompetence. While Roger Ebert didn't even bother dressing it up with sarcasm, He wrote that the film simply existed in my mind like a heavy lump. The words stung, but they weren't wrong. Audiences weren't impressed either. Paramount claimed the movie made about $14 million, but with a production budget north of $20 million, it was an undeniable flop. Even Clint Eastwood, who had come into the project riding high off his tough guy Western fame, later admitted the obvious truth. Too much money, not enough movie. And Eastwood's side of the story? That was a whole other drama. He'd signed on expecting something bold and revolutionary, a darker, grittier musical that would mix frontier realism with bold themes, even an interracial romance at its core. That was the pitch that got him hooked. But what he ended up with was a bloated, confused spectacle that left everyone, from the stars to the studio, wondering how a dream that big had gone so completely off the rails. That was the movie Clint Eastwood thought he was signing up for, a bold, gritty musical that would flip Hollywood on its head. He was young, hungry, and ready to take a creative risk. His own father had been a singer, and Clint genuinely believed that maybe, just maybe, the talent ran in the family. He wanted to stretch himself, to prove he could be more than a silent gunslinger. But the dream crumbled fast, just like those tunnels beneath No Name City. The script changed, the tone shifted, and the deeper, daring ideas that first drew him in were tossed aside. The interracial romance? Gone. The grit and darkness? Rewritten into dust. What was left felt like a shiny, overblown parody of what he'd imagined. A glossy, old-school Hollywood musical that didn't fit his image at all. When Eastwood finally sat down to watch the completed film, it nearly broke him. He later confessed that as the credits rolled, he sank into his seat, humiliated and crushed. He even thought about walking away from acting altogether. For a man who'd built his name on toughness and control, Paint Your Wagon was a painful reminder of how quickly a dream could twist into disaster. Looking back now, the movie feels less like entertainment and more like a warning, etched forever into Hollywood history. It was meant to be bold, fearless, and different. Instead, it became a monument to chaos, a production wrecked by weather, ego, heartbreak, and confusion. A $1 million star trying to sing off-key, a sprawling mountain set built just to collapse, and a film that ended up doing exactly the same. Still, that chaos gave us one of Hollywood's wildest stories, an unforgettable glimpse into the price of ambition and the cost of chasing too big a dream. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Lee Marvin, Clint Eastwood, and the madness behind Paint Your Wagon, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment below.